Hello and welcome. It is Vintage Super League time once again. I'm Randy Bueller. I'm joined by Steve Menendy, and welcome, Steve.
Great to be here. Thanks, Randy. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. You appear to have had quite the adventure. Sorry, we're starting a couple minutes later than we normally start our pregame, but you have managed to get into your place now. We can talk some vintage.
I'm excited.
So, how are things? Let's look at the standings first. I want to make sure everybody knows where we're at in terms of what's going on tonight. Here are the standings. David Ochoa currently leads the Vintage Super League, but you see he's a match short of everyone else. We had internet problems last week, so we are going to start tonight with the makeup match between David Ochoa and Bob Maher. So that will then mean that everybody has played 7 matches. There's only 9 matches in the regular season, so we are closing in on it right now. By my math, if Webb beats Bob, it actually clinches at least a tie for the playoffs for all 3 of Webb, Efro, and Rich Shea. There won't be any way to get 4 players above 5 wins unless Bob can beat Webb. But if Bob wins, we still have all the glorious chaos. Meanwhile, everybody is technically still live for playoffs. Everybody can get to 4 and 5, and at this point, 4 and 5 could still be good enough to be tied for the playoffs. 4 and 5 can actually be good enough to be tied for 4th all the way through 10th. So both playoffs and relegation. Anyway, we can look at the schedule. You will see that, well, you might expect us to have 6 matches this week, and there are 6 matches listed here. Unfortunately, Chris Pakula was unable to get home from vacation. He is trapped, tragically, has to spend another day at, I think he's in Turks and Caicos somewhere. He tweeted a picture with palm trees and just looked like he was in agony. But Chris will not be able to play tonight. So that match against Ochoa will actually happen next week. We'll have at least 6 matches on our week 9 end of the regular season, possibly more if we wind up with ties to break. I don't know. What is it about Ochoa? Does nobody want to play him? Are people just running scared?
Well, Randy, I think everyone is rooting for chaos except for the people standing at the top, and chaos is good here because it just means more magic, and we're always
True.
for more magic. But
Absolutely
I think
true.
some of the players, including myself, and I suspect yourself, are really focused on the relegation question right now. We're trying to avoid last, and
True story.
that story has always been interesting because the first 2 seasons where we had relegation, the key was to get to the 3rd win. So we're fighting for the 3rd win right now because we've got 3 players with 2 wins, and there's a chance that one of them won't be able to get out of there. But if we do get all the players out 3 wins, then it's more chaos.
Oh, yeah. Chaos this time, though, that tie for last, we all have to go to the play-in tournament if we wind up tied for it. It's a little bit different than in years past where there was exactly one person getting relegated out of the league. Now it's everyone tied for last getting sent down to the play-in tournament to win their spot back. So you're right. It's you, me, and Kai right now. And I don't know. Obviously, I'm hoping that 1 win is good enough. No offense. I may have a rooting interest in your match and Kai's match. But it may take 2 wins as given to get out of the tie, right? It could easily be the case that all 3 of us just split the next 2 rounds, and suddenly there could be 4 or 5 people tied for last.
Which would also be good for us because that means there's more slots in the play-in tournament. So we're also rooting. If we win, we're rooting for more players at that win ratio.
True story. So. Absolutely true. Wow. So that is the setup for tonight. Your match, we've had some classics between you and Luis over the years at this point.
A lot.
Are we gonna see another classic? I mean, you're both on blue decks. That's where the crazy battles between the 2 of you have happened historically.
Yeah, I was really hoping that Luis was going to play Storm, but he seemed to have decided the last minute to go with something a lot more grindy. And I think it's going to be a tough match for both players.
Yeah.
I've got the broken deck. He's got the hard control deck. So it should be fun to watch, regardless of how it plays out.
I agree. So that's your thoughts on the standings. Did you have thoughts about the way the archetypes have played out? I know that a lot of people have been saying it's really Storm and Shops right now, but there's a good 5 or 6 decks that are sort of good enough to win on any given tournament. What's your take on Vintage at this point?
Well, Well, the landscape of vintage has been a point of contention at least through most of this season. We've seen some vintage community regulars, kind of with some heated, commentary even in the chat, and
Yep.
with the pro players here in the VSL with their own takes. And to be honest, I think that all the takes that have been articulated have some merit. They have some legitimacy. My take is that what you have is basically five schools. To use Robert Hahn's analogy, five schools of magic, of vintage magic. One of them is the Weissman school, which just shows up in, all the different control archetypes, sometimes anchored with Jace, sometimes not. Jace, the Mind Sculptor, is kind of like the ultimate Weissman, JM Tome / Disrupting Scepter card. But the O'Brien school, with the grindy prison deck, the tempo in prison, with the Nether Void, it shows up in today's contemporary workshops and has been very, very effective in this league. I think that what's happened is, and you've talked about this in some of the other pre-games, players who aren't quite sure what to play, but they know they're looking for some guaranteed wins, kind of go to shops. It's just no matter how hard you fight the workshop archetype, you still might lose. I played a deck last week against Rich Shea, which I thought was as well built for workshops as you could possibly do. And I still, of course, it doesn't help drawing 3 Oath creatures in your games, but it just goes to show you what workshops is capable of doing, just by securing a little bit of tempo and then beating you down with golems or ravagers or whatever the case may be. And while I think one of the design approaches to combat workshops in contemporary vintage is using a big mana base and cards like Ancient Grudge, that approach also doesn't always work. I mean, Rich Shea in the premier event, in the Power 9 event, lost in the top 8 to workshops despite designing a deck, as he put it, to beat workshops.
Yep.
And then in the other schools, you've got Reanimator, which in its contemporary form is the archetype you're playing, Dredge.
All right, I'll buy that.
And then it's the same. The original Reanimator decks use a lot of discard, and it just now you've got, instead of the old style Hymn, you've got Cabal Therapy, and instead of Animate Dead, you've got Dread Return. And they used Bazaar back in the day. And then the rest of the archetypes, are basically like aggro control, which shows up as Gush or Merfolk. And then restricted list combo, which goes all the way back to the earliest power artifact fireball decks. But really, you had like the Olirade invitational decks with Time Spiral and Windfall and all those good cards. And that's the Dark Petition Storm deck. And Dark Petition is just the most recent and best way to abuse that archetype. What I think has happened, though, when we talk about archetypes, we kind of miss what's happening tactically, which is there are some really important tactics in the format now that attack the format at different kinds of angles. So Defense Grid is, I think, at maximal power right now because you've got this abundance of blue counter magic that really can't do anything about it. Flusterstorm, Mental Misstep, and so on. And then you've also got cards like Ancient Grudge, which are pivotal in attacking workshop decks. So I think the tactics in Vintage matter almost as much as the strategies right now, and how people sort of position themselves to be able to incorporate those tactics or not. And one of the most interesting tactics is a tactic that you use, Leyline of Sanctity, which is really well positioned against Oath of Druids and Tendrils and all the duress effects and Hercules and so on. So, what's happening tactically is super interesting.
I mentioned this last week, but I actually had a playtest game where I mulliganed all the way to 1, which is becoming depressingly familiar with my Dredge deck. My last card is a Leyline of Sanctity, and I was playing against Oath, so I play Leyline of Sanctity on the first turn. You can't activate Oath of Druids while Leyline of Sanctity is in play. Oath has to target. So I actually came back and won the game from a mulligan to 1 because my one card was Leyline of Sanctity. I mean, obviously it helped that I drew Bazaar Baghdad off the top of my deck immediately, so I got started on turn 2, but still, from literally mulligan to nothing and failed to find the Bazaar. Well, but it was only the Leyline. Like, mulligan to 1, if my one card was a Bazaar, I don't think I win that game against an Oath deck. Like, I can't kill him in 3 turns from nothing.
Yeah.
Anyway, card is super crazy powerful.
Well, I just think that the thing that people should appreciate about Vintage, and this is the last thing I'll just get in here before we get to our match, is that these archetypes recur in new guises and new forms over time, over and over again. And it's exciting to see how they iterate, despite the fact that the format seems to sort of have this eternal component to it. And we didn't even get to talk about Eternal Masters, which is really exciting. Maybe we'll talk about it at the end of the next match. But these archetypes kind of reemerge over time with new tools and new tactics. And the format is, I think, I think you can play any of these schools of Magic, these schools of vintage Magic, and have at least a chance to win.
All the way back to Rob Hahn and the Schools of Magic, posted to the Magic Dojo. What was it, 20 years ago at this point? Crazy. Yeah, that makes sense. Did I hear that our players are ready? Are we ready for match one? Awesome. Let's get down to it. Vintage Super League Week 8 action. Coming right up.